Victoria Caldwell had spent her entire life being dismissed as just the maid's daughter. But when tech billionaire Marcus Sterling accused her of wearing fake jewelry at his charity gala, he had no idea he was about to make the most expensive mistake of his life. What happened next would shake the foundations of Chicago's elite society and reveal a truth that had been hidden for decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal ballroom of the Peninsula Hotel had never looked more magnificent. Chicago's wealthiest had gathered for the annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala, an event that raised millions for children's education. The room sparkled with designer gowns, tailored tuxedos, and jewelry worth more than most people's homes. Among the crowd of philanthropists and business moguls, Victoria Caldwell moved gracefully between tables, her elegant black evening dress drawing subtle glances. Victoria wasn't supposed to be there as a guest. For the past 3 years, she had worked as an event coordinator for Prestige Affairs, the premier catering company that handled Chicago's most exclusive gatherings. Tonight, however, was different. Her supervisor had fallen ill at the last minute, leaving Victoria to oversee the entire operation solo. At 28, Victoria had learned to navigate these worlds with quiet confidence. She understood the unspoken rules, the careful choreography of service that kept Chicago's elite comfortable while remaining invisible herself. Her mother, Elena Caldwell, had worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families throughout Victoria's childhood, and those early lessons in discretion had served Victoria well in her career. But tonight something felt different. As Victoria checked on the dessert service, she noticed several guests stealing glances at her necklace. The piece was stunning, an intricate design featuring what appeared to be a large central sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds, all set in an ornate platinum setting that caught the ballroom's crystal chandeliers perfectly. The necklace had been her grandmother's, passed down through 3 generations of Caldwell women. Victoria's mother had given it to her on her 21st birthday, along with a story about how it had been in their family since the 1940s. Elena had always been vague about its origins, mentioning only that it had belonged to Victoria's great-grandmother, Isabella, who had worked for a prominent family before the war. Marcus Sterling noticed the necklace too. The 45-year-old tech mogul had built his fortune through a series of innovative software companies, each acquisition adding millions to his net worth. He was used to being the richest person in any room, and he took pride in his ability to spot authentic luxury from across a crowded space. Sterling collected rare gems as a hobby, and he prided himself on his expert eye. As Victoria supervised the wine service near Sterling's table, he called out to her with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Excuse me, miss," Sterling said, his voice carrying across the nearby tables. "That's quite an impressive piece you're wearing." Victoria paused, her hand instinctively moving to the necklace at her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." Sterling's wife, Diane, looked up from her conversation with the mayor's wife. Several other guests turned their attention to the exchange, sensing the shift in atmosphere that preceded Sterling's more dramatic moments. "May I ask where you acquired such a elaborate piece?" Sterling's tone carried a hint of skepticism that made Victoria's stomach tighten. "It was my grandmother's," Victoria replied simply, maintaining her professional composure despite the growing attention from nearby tables. Sterling stood, his 6-foot frame imposing as he moved closer to examine the necklace. His expression grew increasingly skeptical as he studied the piece, his eyes narrowing with the confidence of someone who believed he had spotted a deception. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news," Sterling announced, his voice now loud enough to draw attention from across the ballroom. "But that necklace is fake." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Conversations around them gradually died as more guests turned to witness the unfolding drama. Victoria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but years of professional training kept her voice steady. "I beg your pardon," she said quietly. Sterling's confidence grew with his audience. "The sapphire, the diamonds, even the setting, it's all costume jewelry. Very well-made costume jewelry, I'll give you that, but fake nonetheless. The sapphire alone, if it were real, would be worth millions. No offense, but someone in your position wouldn't be wearing authentic gems of that caliber." Diane Sterling placed a restraining hand on her husband's arm. "Marcus, perhaps this isn't the place." "No, this is exactly the place," Sterling interrupted, his voice carrying the righteous indignation of someone who believed he was exposing a fraud. "I won't have staff members at my charity gala trying to pass off costume jewelry as authentic pieces. It's dishonest, and it's insulting to our guests who are wearing genuine articles." Victoria's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained controlled. "Mr. Sterling, I can assure you that I never claimed this necklace was anything other than a family heirloom. I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. Family heirloom," Sterling scoffed. "Look, I don't mean to embarrass you, but I've been collecting rare gems for over 20 years. I know authentic from reproduction. That central stone would need to be a cashmere sapphire of exceptional quality to justify the setting, and the diamonds would need to be flawless. We're talking about a piece that would be worth 8 or 9 figures if it were real." The crowd around them had grown larger. Victoria could see phone cameras discreetly pointing in their direction, social media posts already being crafted about the evening's unexpected drama. She felt trapped, humiliated in front of Chicago's most powerful people, all because she had chosen to wear her grandmother's necklace to work. "I understand your expertise, Mr. Sterling," Victoria said, her professional mask finally slipping to reveal her genuine hurt and anger. "But this necklace has been in my family for generations. Whether it's worth millions or nothing at all, it has value to me." Sterling waved dismissively. "Sentimental value doesn't change the facts. I'm simply trying to save you from further embarrassment. Anyone with knowledge of fine jewelry can see that it's a reproduction." Several guests nodded in agreement, their own jewelry collections giving them confidence in Sterling's assessment. Victoria felt utterly alone in the room full of people, her professional reputation crumbling with each passing moment. "Perhaps," Victoria said, her voice gaining strength, "we should have it professionally authenticated before making such definitive statements." Sterling laughed, a sound that carried no warmth. "By all means, I'd be happy to refer you to several reputable appraisers in the city, but I can save you the time and expense. It's fake." As Victoria stood there, surrounded by Chicago's elite who had already judged and dismissed her, she made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't let Marcus Sterling's arrogance and assumptions go unchallenged. She would prove him wrong no matter what it took. What none of them knew was that Isabella Caldwell, Victoria's great-grandmother, had kept a secret that would soon shake the very foundations of Chicago's high society. Victoria left the Peninsula Hotel that night with her dignity intact, but her confidence shattered. The video clips from the charity gala had already begun circulating on social media, with hashtags like "Fake Necklacegate" trending across Chicago's society pages. By morning, the story had been picked up by local news outlets, each one painting her as either a social climber caught in a lie or an innocent victim of Marcus Sterling's public cruelty. She sat in her small apartment in Lincoln Park, staring at the necklace spread across her kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light. In the stark illumination, removed from the ballroom's romantic glow, even she began to question what she knew about the piece. The sapphire seemed almost too perfect, the diamonds too brilliant, the craftsmanship too exquisite for something that had supposedly belonged to a housekeeper's family. Victoria's phone buzzed with another notification. Her supervisor at Prestige Affairs, Robert Chen, had left 3 voicemails since dawn. The company was hemorrhaging clients who didn't want to be associated with the necklace controversy. 2 major contracts had already been cancelled, and 3 more were in jeopardy. But it was her mother's silence that worried Victoria most. Elena Caldwell lived in a modest retirement community in Evanston, and Victoria had expected her to call immediately after the news broke. Instead, there had been nothing. Victoria drove to Evanston that afternoon, finding her mother tending to tomato plants in the community garden. Elena looked older than her 72 years, her hands shaking slightly as she pruned dead leaves. When she saw Victoria approaching, her face crumpled with an expression that mixed guilt, fear, and something that looked almost like relief. "Mama, we need to talk," Victoria said gently. Settling onto a wooden bench beside the garden bed, Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I saw the news. That horrible man, humiliating you like that in front of everyone." She paused, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "But Victoria, there are things about that necklace. Things I should have told you years ago." Victoria's heart began to race. "What things?" Elena sat down heavily, her arthritis making the movement painful. "Your great-grandmother Isabella didn't just work for any wealthy family. She worked for the Ashfords." The name hit Victoria like a physical blow. Everyone in Chicago knew the Ashford family, old money aristocrats who had built their fortune in steel and railroads in the late 1800s. The family had been decimated by a series of tragedies in the 1940s, including a house fire that killed patriarch Jonathan Ashford and his wife Margaret. Their extensive art and jewelry collections had reportedly been lost in the blaze. Isabella was Margaret Ashford's personal maid and confidant, Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper. When the fire happened, Isabella was one of the few people who knew where Mrs. Ashford kept her most valuable pieces. The family was in chaos, the house was destroyed, and in all the confusion, she took the necklace, Victoria finished, her voice hollow. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Not stole," Elena said firmly. "Mrs. Ashford gave it to her. Isabella always insisted on that. Mrs. Ashford knew she was dying. The smoke inhalation was too severe. She pressed the necklace into Isabella's hands and made her promise to keep it safe, to never let the Ashford relatives get their hands on it." Victoria felt the world spinning around her. Why? Why wouldn't she want her own family to have it? Elena's expression darkened. Because the fire wasn't an accident. Mrs. Ashford suspected her nephew, Charles Ashford, had set it deliberately. He stood to inherit everything if Jonathan and Margaret died without children. Mrs. Ashford had discovered some financial irregularities, money missing from the family trust. She confronted Charles the day before the fire. The implications crashed over Victoria in waves. If the fire had been arson, if Charles Ashford had murdered his uncle and aunt for their inheritance, then the necklace wasn't just valuable, it was evidence of one of Chicago's most notorious, unsolved crimes. Isabella never reported what she knew because she was terrified, Elena continued. She was an immigrant, working without proper documentation. Who would have believed her word against a wealthy white man? So she kept the necklace hidden, passed it down through our family as a secret. Victoria stared at her mother, processing decades of lies and half-truths. "Mama, do you understand what this means? If that necklace really did belong to Margaret Ashford, if it's authentic, it could be worth a fortune," Elena whispered. "But it could also be evidence in a murder case that was never solved." That evening, Victoria began her research in earnest. She started with the Chicago Public Library's historical archives, searching for newspaper articles from 1943 about the Ashford fire. The coverage was extensive. The family had been Chicago royalty, and their sudden deaths had dominated local headlines for weeks. What she found made her blood run cold. The fire had indeed been suspicious. Investigators had noted that it started in multiple locations simultaneously, and accelerant residue had been found throughout the mansion. But Charles Ashford, who had inherited the family fortune, had significant political connections. The investigation had been quietly closed within 6 months, officially ruled accidental due to faulty electrical wiring. Victoria discovered that Charles had lived lavishly after the fire. expanding the family business empire and eventually serving 2 terms in the Illinois State Senate. He had died in 1987, taking any secrets about that night to his grave, but the most shocking discovery came when Victoria found Margaret Ashford's insurance records. Listed among the jewelry reported as destroyed in the fire was a sapphire and diamond necklace valued at $2.3 million in 1943 dollars. The description matched her great-grandmother's necklace perfectly, down to the intricate platinum setting and the cashmere sapphire centerpiece. Victoria's hands trembled as she did the calculations. With inflation and the increased rarity of cashmere sapphires, the necklace could easily be worth over $100 million in today's market. The next morning, Victoria called the most reputable jewelry appraiser in Chicago, Harrison and Associates, the same firm that had authenticated pieces for the Art Institute and several major auction houses. Dr. Patricia Harrison agreed to see her that afternoon, intrigued by Victoria's story and the potential historical significance of the piece. Dr. Harrison's office occupied the top floor of a Michigan Avenue high-rise, its walls lined with certificates and photographs of famous gems she had authenticated over her 40-year career. She was a small woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and her reputation for honesty was legendary in Chicago's art and antique community. "Before we begin," Dr. Harrison said, adjusting her jeweler's loop, "I want you to understand that authentication is a complex process. Age, provenance, and craftsmanship all play crucial roles. I've seen many family heirlooms that owners believed were valuable turn out to be reproductions." Victoria nodded, bracing herself for disappointment. Dr. Harrison began her examination with the setting, using specialized tools to test the platinum content. Her expression remained neutral as she moved to the diamonds, checking their clarity and cut under high-powered magnification. But when she reached the central sapphire, her demeanor changed entirely. She spent nearly 20 minutes examining the stone from every angle, using spectroscopic analysis to determine its origin and composition. Finally, she set down her instruments and looked at Victoria with an expression of complete astonishment. "Miss Caldwell," she said, her voice barely steady, "you need to sit down." Dr. Patricia Harrison's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. Her usual professional composure completely shattered. Victoria watched in growing anxiety as the renowned appraiser dialed a number she had memorized decades ago. "Professor Williams? This is Patricia Harrison. I need you to come to my office immediately. Bring your cashmere sapphire reference database and the portable X-ray fluorescence analyzer." She paused, glancing at Victoria. "I believe I'm looking at the Ashford sapphire." Victoria's blood turned to ice. She had even heard whispers of the legendary Ashford sapphire, a stone so rare and perfect that it had been featured in jewelry exhibitions across Europe before World War II. According to legend, it had been lost in the Chicago fire that killed the Ashford family. Professor David Williams arrived within the hour, a tall man in his 70s with wild grey hair and eyes that sparkled with scientific curiosity. He was a gemologist emeritus from Northwestern University and one of the world's foremost experts on cashmere sapphires. The portable equipment he wheeled into Dr. Harrison's office looked more suited to a medical procedure than a jewelry appraisal. "Patricia, you sounded absolutely frantic on the phone," Professor Williams said as he unpacked his specialized instruments. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" Dr. Harrison gestured toward the necklace, now secured in a specialized viewing chamber under multiple light sources. "David, I want you to examine that central stone and tell me what you think, but don't let my opinion influence your assessment." Professor Williams approached the viewing chamber with the reverence of a priest approaching an altar. He spent the next 30 minutes conducting tests that Victoria didn't understand, using instruments that measured everything from the stone's internal structure to its trace mineral composition. The room fell into complete silence, except for the soft humming of machinery and the occasional sharp intake of breath from the professor. Finally, Professor Williams straightened up and removed his magnification goggles. His face had gone completely pale. "Patricia, where did you find this stone?" His voice carried a mixture of awe and disbelief. "It belongs to Miss Caldwell here. It's been in her family since the 1940s. Professor Williams turned to Victoria with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Caldwell, what I'm about to tell you will change your life forever. This sapphire is not only authentic, it's one of the rarest gems ever discovered. The internal crystal structure, the color saturation, the complete absence of heat treatment. This is a virgin cashmere sapphire of museum quality." Victoria's knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of Dr. Harrison's desk for support. "What does that mean exactly?" "Cashmere sapphires were mined from a single deposit high in the Himalayas for only a few years in the 1880s, Professor Williams explained, his academic excitement overriding his shock. "The mine collapsed, and no stones of this quality have ever been found again. The ones that exist are considered the holy grail of colored gemstones." Dr. Harrison consulted her computer, pulling up recent auction records. "David, help me with this calculation. The stone appears to be approximately 47 carats, unheated, with perfect cornflower blue coloration." Professor Williams whistled softly. "Patricia, the last cashmere sapphire of similar quality that came to auction was 28 carats. It sold for $674 million in 2015, but this stone," he gestured toward the necklace, "this is nearly twice that size and appears to have superior clarity. And the setting." Victoria managed to whisper. Dr. Harrison had been examining the surrounding diamonds while Professor Williams analyzed the sapphire. "The diamonds are all deflawless. Old European cut, probably dating to the early 1900s. The craftsmanship suggests it was made by either Cartier or Tiffany and Co. during their golden age of design, Professor." Williams was now consulting a thick reference book filled with historical photographs. He found the page he was looking for and held it up for comparison with the necklace. The photograph, dated 1925, showed a woman wearing an identical piece at a charity benefit in New York. "This is Margaret Ashford, wearing the necklace at the Metropolitan Opera's annual gala," Professor Williams read from the caption. The piece was commissioned by her husband, Jonathan Ashford, from Cartier, Paris in 1923 as a 10th wedding anniversary gift. The central cashmere sapphire was reportedly acquired from the estate of a Russian nobleman fleeing the revolution. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. Victoria wasn't just holding a valuable piece of jewelry. She was holding a documented piece of American high society history that had been presumed destroyed for over 80 years. "What's it worth?" Victoria asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Harrison and Professor Williams exchanged glances. "Ms. Caldwell," Dr. Harrison said carefully, "based on the rarity of the sapphire, the quality of the diamonds, the historical provenance, and the craftsmanship of the setting, I would estimate this necklace is worth between $95 million and $110 million at auction." Victoria had to sit down. The number was so astronomical that it didn't seem real. She had been wearing over $100 million around her neck while serving dinner to Chicago's elite, and Marcus Sterling had dismissed it as fake costume jewelry. But Professor Williams looked troubled. "Miss Caldwell, there's something else you need to understand. A piece of this value and historical significance, its disappearance and reappearance, will attract attention from many quarters. Insurance companies, law enforcement, the Ashford family descendants, possibly even international authorities, if there are questions about how it left the country originally." Dr. Harrison nodded gravely. "David's right. We're not just talking about authentication anymore. This necklace is potentially evidence in a criminal case. If your great-grandmother's story about the fire is true, if Margaret Ashford really did give this to her before dying, then I might be able to prove that Charles Ashford committed murder," Victoria finished, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Professor Williams was already on his phone, calling contacts at the Smithsonian and the Getty Museum. "Patricia, we need to document everything. Photographs, spectroscopic analysis, provenance research. This discovery will make international headlines. As the two experts began coordinating the extensive documentation process, Victoria stepped outside onto the building's observation deck. The Chicago skyline stretched before her. The same city where her great-grandmother had worked as a maid, where her mother had cleaned houses, where she herself had struggled to build a career in event planning. In the space of 24 hours, she had gone from being publicly humiliated as a fraud to potentially being one of the wealthiest women in America. But more importantly, she might finally have the resources to seek justice for a crime that had been covered up for over 80 years. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Ms. Caldwell, this is Attorney General Sarah Richardson's office. We understand you may have information relevant to a cold case investigation. Please call us immediately." Victoria stared at the message, realizing that word of the authentication was already spreading through official channels. The quiet life she had known was about to end forever, replaced by something she couldn't yet imagine. But first, she had a promise to keep. She was going to prove Marcus Sterling wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Within hours of Professor Williams uploading the authentication documentation to the International Gemological Institute's secure database, Victoria's phone became a weapon of mass disruption. Reporters, lawyers, auction house representatives, and museum curators called continuously, each trying to be the first to secure an exclusive with the woman who had stumbled onto one of the greatest gemological discoveries of the century. But the call that changed everything came at 6:47 p.m. from Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos of the Chicago Police Department's Cold Case Division. "Miss Caldwell, I'm calling about the Ashford fire investigation. We need to meet immediately. There have been some recent developments that make your necklace extremely relevant to an active criminal investigation." Victoria met Detective Santos at a downtown coffee shop, choosing a corner booth far from the window where paparazzi might spot them. Santos was a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent brown eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had spent 20 years solving Chicago's most challenging cases. 3 months ago, Santos began, pulling out a thick file folder, we received an anonymous tip about Charles Ashford's involvement in his uncle's death. Someone sent us a box of documents, financial records, correspondence, even some photographs. We've been quietly investigating ever since. Victoria's heart raced. What kind of documents? Santos opened the folder, revealing aged papers covered in careful handwriting. Letters between Charles Ashford and a man named Vincent Torino, who ran illegal gambling operations in Chicago during the 1940s. Charles had accumulated massive debts, and Torino was pressuring him for payment. The detective spread out photocopied pages across the small table. Charles wrote to Torino explaining his plan to eliminate Jonathan and Margaret Ashford and inherit the family fortune. He detailed how he would stage the fire, which rooms to target first, even how he would ensure his uncle and aunt couldn't escape. Victoria felt sick. This proves he murdered them. It proves intent and premeditation, Santos corrected. But we needed physical evidence to support the documentary proof. Your necklace, if it really did come from Margaret Ashford on the night she died, could provide that evidence. Santos pulled out a photograph from 1943 showing the Ashford mansion after the fire. The official investigation claimed the fire started in the electrical system, but our arson experts have re-examined the evidence. The burn patterns clearly indicate multiple ignition points, exactly as Charles described in his letters to Torino. Victoria studied the photograph, trying to imagine her great-grandmother Isabella working in that grand house, witnessing the horror of that night. "Detective, if these letters prove Charles was guilty, why do you need the necklace?" "Because the letters came to us anonymously, and we can't prove their authenticity without corroborating evidence," Santos explained. "But if we can establish that Margaret Ashford survived the initial fire long enough to give your great-grandmother the necklace, It supports the timeline described in the letters. It proves Margaret knew she was dying and had time to act deliberately. Santos leaned forward intently. Miss Caldwell, there's something else. Charles Ashford had children, 2 sons who are still alive. Thomas Ashford is currently a federal judge, and his brother Richard runs one of Chicago's largest law firms. If we can prove their father was a murderer, it will destroy their family's legacy and potentially impact some very powerful people. The implications hit Victoria like a physical blow. She wasn't just dealing with a valuable necklace anymore. She was potentially exposing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Chicago's legal establishment. Her phone rang, displaying a number she recognized. Marcus Sterling, Ms. Caldwell. Sterling's voice was carefully controlled, but Victoria could hear the underlying tension. I believe we need to talk. I understand there have been some developments regarding your jewelry. Mr. Sterling, I think you said everything you needed to say at your charity gala, Victoria replied coldly. Actually, I'd like to make you an offer. I'm prepared to purchase the necklace from you for a substantial sum. Let's say $5 million. Cash, no questions asked, immediate transfer. Victoria nearly laughed out loud. $5 million for a piece worth over $100 million. And Sterling was offering it like he was doing her a favor. That's a very generous offer. Mr. Sterling, but I'm not interested in selling. Sterling's tone hardened. Miss Caldwell, I don't think you understand the complexities of what you're dealing with. Owning a piece with questionable provenance can lead to years of legal battles, investigations, and public scrutiny. $5 million would allow you to walk away from all of that. Questionable provenance. Victoria's anger flared. You mean the provenance that proves it belonged to Margaret Ashford and is worth 20 times what you're offering? There was a long pause on Sterling's end. When he spoke again, his voice carried a barely concealed threat. Be very careful, Miss Caldwell. There are people in this city with significant resources and influence who might not appreciate having old wounds reopened. Some stories are better left buried. The call ended, leaving Victoria staring at her phone in disbelief. Detective Santos had heard every word. Miss Caldwell, that sounded very much like intimidation to me, Santos said grimly. Do you know of any connection between Sterling and the Ashford family? Victoria shook her head, but Santos was already pulling out her laptop. A quick search revealed information that made both women's blood run cold. Sterling Technologies' first major client in 1987 was Ashford and Associates law firm, Santos read from the screen. Richard Ashford personally recommended Sterling for several major municipal contracts that launched his business empire. The detective's expression grew darker as she continued reading. And Sterling's wife, Diane, serves on the board of the Ashford Family Foundation, which manages what remains of the family's charitable trust. Victoria felt the pieces clicking together. So Sterling wasn't just trying to humiliate me at the gala. He was trying to discredit the necklace before anyone could authenticate it. It looks that way, Santos agreed. The question is, how did he know to be concerned about your necklace in the first place? Santos's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it quickly, her face growing pale. Miss Caldwell, we have a problem. Someone just broke into Dr. Harrison's office. They didn't take any money or equipment. They only targeted files related to your necklace authentication. Victoria's hands began to shake. Are Dr. Harrison and Professor Williams okay? They're fine. The break-in happened after business hours. But all their documentation, photographs, and analysis reports are gone. Someone clearly doesn't want evidence of your necklace's authenticity to become public. Santos closed her laptop decisively. Ms. Caldwell, I think you're in danger. These people killed Jonathan and Margaret Ashford in 1943 to protect their secret. They're not going to hesitate to silence you now. Victoria looked around the coffee shop, suddenly seeing potential threats in every face. What do I do? First, we're putting you in protective custody until we can assess the full scope of the threat, Santos said, already calling for backup. Second, we're going to use your necklace to set a trap that will finally bring justice for the Ashford murders. As they waited for Santos's partner to arrive, Victoria realized that her quiet life was truly over. She was no longer just a woman trying to vindicate herself against Marcus Sterling's arrogance. She was the key witness in a murder case that powerful people would kill to keep buried. But she had made her choice. Isabella Caldwell had kept Margaret Ashford's secret for 80 years. Now it was time for the truth to finally come to light. The safe house was a nondescript apartment in Wicker Park, chosen specifically because it was the last place anyone would expect to find someone harboring a $100 million necklace. Victoria had been there for 3 days, watching through bulletproof windows as Detective Santos and her team built their case against the Ashford conspiracy. The break-in at Dr. Harrison's office had been more sophisticated than initially reported. Security footage revealed 2 men in expensive suits who knew exactly where to find the authentication files. They had used electronic lockpicks and moved through the building with military precision, suggesting professional training rather than common burglary. "We've identified one of them," Detective Santos announced, entering the apartment with a folder of surveillance photos. James Kruger, former Army Special Forces, now works for Blackwater Security Solutions. His current employer is listed as private consulting, but his bank records show regular payments from Sterling Technologies. Victoria studied the photograph of a hard-faced man in his 30s with cold eyes and visible neck tattoos. Sterling hired military contractors to steal evidence. "It gets worse," Santos continued. "Kruger's partner is Anthony Reeves, also ex-military, also on Sterling's payroll. These aren't just corporate security guards. They're the kind of people you hire when you need problems permanently eliminated." Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Martinez had joined the investigation, bringing federal resources to bear on what was rapidly becoming a complex, organized crime case. Martinez was a sharp woman in her late 30s who had built her career prosecuting white-collar criminals and wasn't intimidated by powerful defendants. "We've been monitoring Sterling's communications since the break-in," Martinez explained, setting up a laptop on the safe house's dining table. "He's been making calls to Judge Thomas Ashford and Richard Ashford's law firm. The conversations are carefully coded, but the pattern suggests they're coordinating a response to what they perceive as a threat." Santos pulled up transcripts of intercepted phone calls. "Yesterday, Sterling told Judge Ashford that the Chicago problem needs to be resolved permanently before it spreads to other jurisdictions. When Ashford asked about timeframes, Sterling said within the week before any more documentation surfaces." Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. "They're planning to kill me." "We think so," Martinez confirmed. "But we're going to use their urgency against them. We're setting up a controlled meeting where Sterling believes he can eliminate both you and the necklace simultaneously. Our plan is to give him exactly what he thinks he wants." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Victoria would attend a private auction at the Chicago Art Institute, supposedly to sell the necklace to anonymous international buyers. The event would be invitation only, creating a controlled environment where Sterling and his associates would feel confident making their move. Dr. Harrison and Professor Williams had secretly recreated all their authentication documentation at a secure facility, but publicly they were maintaining that the break-in had destroyed all evidence of the necklace's value. This misinformation was designed to make Sterling believe he had successfully discredited Victoria's claims. "The beauty of this plan," Santos explained, "is that Sterling will have to expose himself to stop the auction. He can't let international buyers verify the necklace's authenticity, because that would restart the entire authentication process he thinks he's already sabotaged. Victoria would wear a duplicate necklace created by the FBI's forensic art team, while the real Ashford sapphire remained in federal custody as evidence. The duplicate was convincing enough to fool casual observation, but would fail any serious gemological examination, a fact Sterling wouldn't discover until it was too late. The morning of the auction, Victoria stood in the Art Institute's private viewing room. adjusting the fake necklace around her throat while FBI agents tested their surveillance equipment. She had spent the previous evening studying Sterling's psychological profile. Prepared by federal behavioral analysts, Sterling is a narcissist with an extreme need for control, Agent Patricia Vance explained. He genuinely believes he's superior to everyone around him, which is why he publicly humiliated you at the charity gala. He doesn't just want to win, he wants his victories to be witnessed and acknowledged. The profile suggested Sterling would want to confront Victoria personally before eliminating her, driven by his need to demonstrate his intellectual superiority one final time. This psychological quirk would give the FBI the evidence they needed to prove premeditation. The auction was scheduled to begin at 7 p.m., with invited guests including representatives from Sotheby's, Christie's, and several private collectors known for acquiring pieces with questionable provenance. The FBI had carefully selected attendees who would be credible but not so prestigious that Sterling would hesitate to act. Victoria entered the Art Institute's Renaissance Hall at exactly 6:45 p.m., surrounded by a carefully choreographed crowd of federal agents posing as auction staff, security personnel, and journalists. Every conversation was being recorded, every movement tracked by multiple camera angles. Sterling arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Diane and two men Victoria recognized from surveillance photos as Kruger and Reeves. Judge Thomas Ashford entered separately, maintaining plausible deniability, while Richard Ashford sent a representative from his law firm. The early part of the evening proceeded exactly as planned. Victoria mingled with potential buyers, discussing the necklace's history, while FBI agents recorded every interaction. Sterling maintained his distance initially, observing from across the room with the patience of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. The auction began with Dr. Harrison providing a deliberately vague presentation about the necklace's possible origins. She mentioned the Ashford family connection, but claimed that the authentication documents had been destroyed in the recent break-in, making definitive verification impossible. While we cannot provide absolute provenance, Dr. Harrison announced to the assembled crowd, the craftsmanship and apparent age of this piece suggest significant historical value. Bidding will begin at $5 million. While we cannot provide absolute provenance, Dr. Harrison announced to the assembled crowd, the craftsmanship and apparent age of this piece suggest significant historical value. Bidding will begin at $5 million. This was Sterling's cue. As planned, he interrupted the proceedings with theatrical outrage. Ladies and gentlemen, I must object to this entire proceeding, Sterling declared, striding to the front of the room with Kruger and Reeves flanking him. This woman is attempting to defraud you with a piece of costume jewelry. I examined this necklace personally and can assure you it's worthless. Victoria stepped forward, her wireless microphone picking up every word for the FBI recording devices. Mr. Sterling, if you're so confident it's fake, why are you trying so hard to stop its sale? Sterling's composure cracked slightly, revealing the rage beneath his polished exterior. Because I won't tolerate fraud being perpetrated in my city against reputable collectors. Your city? Victoria pressed, following the script the FBI had prepared. That's interesting, considering your family has no historical connection to Chicago's art scene. Unless, of course, you're protecting someone else's interests. The psychology profile had predicted this moment perfectly. Sterling's need to demonstrate his superiority overcame his caution, and he began revealing information he should have kept secret. Miss Caldwell, you have no idea what forces you're dealing with, Sterling snarled, moving closer to her with his security team. The Ashford family built this city, and some secrets are worth protecting at any cost. Agent Vance, positioned near the room's main exit, signaled her team. Sterling had just admitted to protecting the Ashford family's secrets, establishing the conspiracy connection they needed for federal prosecution. But Sterling wasn't finished. His narcissism demanded that Victoria understand. the full scope of her defeat before he eliminated her, did he? You really think you could threaten one of Chicago's most powerful families with some fairy tale about a house fire? Sterling continued, his voice rising. Charles Ashford did what was necessary to preserve his family's legacy, and we'll do the same to preserve his memory. The admission hit the room like a thunderbolt. Sterling had just confessed to being part of a conspiracy to cover up Charles Ashford's murders, and every word was being recorded by multiple federal agencies. The moment Sterling's confession left his lips, the Art Institute's Renaissance Hall erupted into controlled chaos. Agent Vance's team moved with practiced precision, surrounding Sterling and his security detail before they could react to their tactical error. Marcus Sterling, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and intimidation of a federal witness, Agent Vance announced. Producing her FBI credentials as additional agents flooded the room from concealed positions. Sterling's face went through a series of emotions: shock, rage, and finally a cold calculation as he realized the full scope of the trap he had walked into. Kruger and Reeves attempted to reach for concealed weapons, but found themselves facing a dozen federal agents with superior positioning and firepower. This is entrapment, Sterling snarled as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. My lawyers will have this thrown out before morning. District Attorney Martinez stepped forward, her expression triumphant. Actually, Mr. Sterling, entrapment requires law enforcement to induce someone to commit a crime they wouldn't normally commit. You've been conspiring to cover up murder for decades. We just gave you an opportunity to reveal it. Judge Thomas Ashford had attempted to slip out during the initial confusion, but Agent Vance had positioned personnel at every exit. He was arrested in the museum's lobby, his judicial immunity useless against federal charges of conspiracy and accessory to murder after the fact. Richard Ashford's representative, corporate attorney David Nash, immediately began negotiating his client's surrender in exchange for testimony against Sterling and the judge. Within hours, Richard Ashford was in federal custody, providing detailed information about the family's 8-decade cover-up in exchange for a reduced sentence. The real breakthrough came when forensic accountants analyzing Sterling's financial records discovered something that even Detective Santos hadn't anticipated. Sterling hadn't just been protecting the Ashford family's reputation. He had been systematically looting the Ashford Family Foundation. For over 30 years, Sterling used his relationship with the family to gain control of the foundation's investment portfolio. Martinez explained to Victoria the following morning. He's embezzled over $40 million through fraudulent tech contracts and inflated consulting fees. The Ashford murders weren't just about inheritance. They were about creating a family so desperate to hide their patriarch's crimes that they'd allow Sterling to steal from them for decades. The media explosion was unprecedented. Within 24 hours of Sterling's arrest, the story had become international news. The $100 million Maid appeared on front pages from New York to London, with Victoria's transformation from publicly humiliated service worker to key witness in a century-old murder case capturing global imagination. CNN ran a documentary special featuring interviews with gemology experts who confirmed that cashmere sapphires of the Ashford necklaces quality were among the rarest objects on Earth. The Smithsonian Institution formally requested to display the necklace as part of a new exhibition on hidden American treasures, offering Victoria a $1 million annual loan fee. But the most satisfying moment came when Marcus Sterling's business empire began collapsing under federal investigation. Sterling Technologies lost every municipal contract within a week as Chicago politicians rushed to distance themselves from the scandal. The company's stock price plummeted 90%, wiping out Sterling's fortune and leaving him facing personal bankruptcy alongside criminal prosecution. Victoria found herself in the surreal position of being courted by every major auction house in the world. Sotheby's offered to handle the necklace's sale with a guaranteed minimum price of $120 million, while Christie's proposed creating an entire auction event around the piece, estimating it could reach $150 million with proper marketing to international collectors. The legal resolution took 18 months, but when it finally came, it exceeded everyone's expectations. Charles Ashford was posthumously convicted of the 1943 murders of Jonathan and Margaret Ashford, officially closing Chicago's oldest cold case. Judge Thomas Ashford was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and stripped of his judicial pension. Richard Ashford received 12 years after his cooperation, while Marcus Sterling was sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. The civil litigation proved even more lucrative for Victoria. The Ashford family's remaining assets, including real estate holdings worth over $60 million, were awarded to her as restitution for her great-grandmother's trauma and decades of silence. Sterling's insurance companies settled for an additional $30 million to avoid wrongful death lawsuits. Victoria ultimately decided not to sell the necklace immediately. Instead, she loaned it to the Smithsonian for 5 years, using the $1 million annual payments to establish the Isabella Caldwell Foundation, providing educational scholarships for children of domestic workers and immigrants. The charity gala, where Marcus Sterling had first humiliated her, became an annual fundraising event for the foundation. The Peninsula Hotel donated the venue, and Chicago's elite competed to attend what had become the city's most prestigious social event. Victoria always wore the Ashford sapphire to these galas, its blue fire serving as a reminder that truth and justice could prevail against even the most powerful conspiracies. Elena Caldwell lived to see her daughter vindicated, passing away peacefully at age 75, with the knowledge that Isabella's secret had finally served its intended purpose. At Elena's funeral, Victoria was approached by dozens of elderly domestic workers who shared stories of witnessing wealthy families' crimes and keeping those secrets out of fear and necessity. These conversations inspired Victoria to expand the foundation's mission, creating a legal defense fund for service workers who wanted to report crimes they had witnessed but feared retaliation. The fund's first case involved a housekeeper who had evidence of tax fraud by a prominent senator, and its success encouraged other workers to come forward with information about corruption in Chicago's power structure. Dr. Harrison and Professor Williams became international celebrities in the gemology world, their authentication of the Ashford sapphire considered one of the most significant discoveries of the modern era. They co-authored a book about the experience, donating the proceeds to Victoria's Foundation and establishing a scholarship program for students studying gemology and art history. Detective Santos was promoted to captain and placed in charge of Chicago Police Department's new white-collar crimes division, specifically tasked with investigating corruption among the city's wealthy elite. Her first major case involved suspicious art transactions at several private galleries, leading to the discovery of a money laundering operation that had operated undetected for over a decade. 5 years after the initial confrontation, Victoria attended the auction where she finally decided to sell the Ashford sapphire. The bidding was fierce, with collectors and museums from around the world competing for ownership of the legendary stone. When the gavel fell, the final price was $167 million, the highest amount ever paid for a single piece of jewelry. Victoria used the proceeds to expand her foundation internationally, creating educational opportunities for workers' children in 12 countries. She also purchased the Chicago mansion, where her great-grandmother Isabella had worked, converting it into a museum dedicated to the history of domestic workers and the wealthy families they served. The museum's most popular exhibit featured the complete story of the Ashford murders, including recreations of the 1943 crime scene and displays of evidence that had finally brought justice after 8 decades. Visitors could see the original letters between Charles Ashford and Vincent Torino, along with recordings of Marcus Sterling's confession at the Art Institute. Marcus Sterling died in federal prison 3 years into his sentence, reportedly of a heart attack brought on by the stress of losing everything he had spent his life building. His obituary in the Chicago Tribune was brief and focused primarily on his crimes rather than his business achievements. Victoria never returned to event planning. Instead, she became a full-time advocate for workers' rights and criminal justice reform, using her platform and resources to expose corruption wherever she found it. She often told interviewers that while the necklace had made her wealthy, the real treasure was discovering that her family's legacy was built on courage and moral conviction rather than silence and fear. The story of the Ashford Sapphire became a legend in Chicago, taught in local schools as an example of how ordinary people could challenge powerful institutions and win. Victoria Caldwell transformed from a maid's daughter dismissed as a fraud into one of the most influential advocates for social justice in American history. And it all began with a man's arrogant assumption that someone like her couldn't possibly own something valuable. Marcus Sterling's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating the necklace's worth, it was underestimating the woman who wore it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.